Chapter 206. Whoa, what sort of bullshit are you spouting? Assassinating the Emperor? You're saying I committed treason? Astana couldn't bring himself to say his own crime and turned a ghastly white. He struggled until his cloth-bound ankles were all peeled and red, until the bandage on his severed right arm, which was tied by the palace, unraveled. No one could beat his dirty temper, but Perez's face, whilst looking down at Astana's figure, remained expressionless. Do you perhaps want to claim that you don't remember anything now? Perez asked in a dry tone. Don't be ridiculous. Why would I ever try to kill the Emperor? Astana murmured, still looking confused. The next moment, he raised his eyes and shouted at Perez. Wait, is that why I'm tied up here right now? Because I tried to assassinate the Emperor? That's right. Ha, then that's fine. Ha ha. Astana burst into a fit of laughter. His sweaty and matted hair, disheveled clothes, and bloodshot eyes made his deranged smile seem as if it belonged to an insane madman. There must have been a misunderstanding. The one I was trying to kill wasn't the Emperor, but rather, it was you. So let this go now. The faces of the knights became ambiguous. How were they meant to explain it? At the same time, they looked toward Perez. Perez snorted and stared at Astana before replying. The one you rushed toward to kill wasn't me. Rather, it was the Emperor instead. Perez said, whilst he opened a sturdy chest. You used this dagger that Bella Sac Lombardi had, didn't you? Astana's gaze arrived at the sharp dagger. Fine, he remembered holding that dagger in his hand. However, what a load of bullshit. It was clearly aimed at you. You lowly thing. I didn't succeed because of the Imperial Knights that were next to you. But Astana's voice gradually faded away into silence. His pupils trembled as if there was an earthquake. With eyes that gradually showed his genuine horror, Astana checked the impressions of the knights with a nervous expression. No, no way. Eventually, a sound that seemed to be half a breath came out of Astana's mouth. Did I really? Astana asked Lord Sloane. Lord Sloane looked at Perez with a glum face, as if to get permission from him, before he replied to Astana. In Madman's Forest, Your Highness the First Prince attacked His Majesty the Emperor, not His Highness the Second Prince. But he was clearly wearing the red armor, and that bitch from Lombardy was next to him. Watch your words, Astana. Perez had already picked up Belsac's dagger and pointed it at Astana's neck before speaking lowly. It was not just a threat. The exceptionally sharp tip of the dagger was already pressed against Astana's Adam's apple. With just a little more force, it would cut through his flesh and stab into him. Understood. Astana answered quickly. As I was saying, the young lady from Lombardy was also clearly next to him. I mean, Florentia was taking care of His Majesty and looking around in the woods. Perez continued to speak without lowering the dagger. Therefore, you are a sinner who attempted to commit treason, Astana. Treason, you say? Why would I? Even if I stay still and do nothing, I'm still a prince who will succeed His Majesty as the Emperor in the future. Why would I commit treason? Hard to say. That's what I'll need to figure out in the future. Perez flipped the dagger in his hand and thrust it in front of Astana's eyes. Astana Narempe Dorelli, you attempted to assassinate His Majesty the Emperor with this dagger in Madman's Forest furthermore. At Perez's order, the knight held out a canteen made of black leather. The investigation revealed that this canteen contained a drug. A drug? It's a drug that absorbs magic at a rapid rate, causing visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, and so on. Yes, that's right. Astana immediately jumped up from his spot and shouted. That's right. Clearly someone must have given me a drug. Otherwise, I couldn't have mistaken His Majesty for you. Are you saying that you didn't choose to take this drug on your own? Lord Sloane asked Astana. Magic boosts the human power by leaps and bounds. That's why Astana had the strength and stamina to push himself to his limits during those few days. Am I crazy enough to want to deliberately absorb magic? Then this is a very important piece of information. Then Lord Sloane asked Astana with an extremely solemn face. Is there anyone else who had access to this canteen? How am I supposed to know that? That canteen wasn't even mine in the first place. It didn't belong to Your Highness. Then why did you continue carrying this canteen in your possession? That's because Belsac. Astana's voice gradually became quieter again. At that moment, Astana's gaze turned to Perez. That canteen. When I ran into the second prince group in the forest, I swiped one of the canteens they had drunk while they were talking about magic. Astana couldn't find it in himself to speak. He felt goosebumps rise all over his body when he came to his senses. Only then did he realize that he was already in the beast's mouth. At that moment, Perez, who was standing at the back, said, Tell me, Astana. His voice was as monotonous as before, but to Astana, it seemed exactly as if he was laughing. For it is His Majesty's command to find all those who were involved, including you. Perez's red eyes were smiling. Slush, slush, slush. Lulak breathed out a long sigh as he sat within a carriage that was entering the Lombardi mansion, watching the view outside the carriage's window. All of a sudden, he felt increasingly fatigued. Seems like I've grown older too. Lulak smiled in vain. It had already been a long time since he found the work of the patriarch overwhelming. However, he had still held on until now. It was because Dr. Estira, the Lombardi's family doctor, was extremely skilled, and Lulak himself had lived in her care ever since he had collapsed a few years ago. But now he felt as if he was at his limit. Lulak sighed once again, rubbing his face. Patriarch, we've arrived at the mansion. The coachman's voice was heard from outside. You've done well, Lulak said as he tried to hide his fatigue as much as he could. Then the carriage door opened. Lulak, who had just thought it was the coachman, widened his eyes. Grandfather, you're back. Tia, although she had now become an adult, his granddaughter, who was smiling wildly, still acted like a child. You must have been tired from the long trip, right? Let's have a nice dinner together, grandfather. Were you waiting for outside just for this, grandfather? It's cold today, though, Lulak asked anxiously when he saw his granddaughter's nose that had turned red due to the cold. It hasn't been long since I came out. My dad is also waiting for you at the restaurant. Grandfather, come with me, Tia said, walking arm in arm with Lulak affectionately. Galyahan as well. All right, all right. Lulak patted Tia's hand, although this hand still felt small and tender. This hand couldn't be more reliable. The affectionate grandfather and granddaughter walked up the steps of the entrance, one by one, while talking. The Brown household reinstatement is going to be discussed properly at the noble meeting. Really? The patriarch of the Brown family and Lady Ramona would like that a lot. Lulak looked at his granddaughter when he heard Tia's words. What are you going to do, Tia? It was you who showed them to the world. That's Tia smiled, crinkling her eyes, finally. It was a smile that resembled her father, Galyahan. Of course, it's good. It was a task that grandfather had assigned to me. What a smart and resolute child. Lulak patted Tia on the head. When did you grow up to be this big? His granddaughter had suddenly grown up to be such a strong support for the family. He had been supportive of her becoming his successor. The Dorelli family, which was already overflowing with blood, was different to the Lombardi household. Lombardi had a promising younger generation that was ready to emerge. Tia is still young, so I'll teach her everything one by one. Then after a few years, it happened when Lulak was having these sort of thoughts. Stagger, Lulak's body collapsed and fell down. It was the exact same situation as when the still young Tia had hugged Lulak in order to cushion his fall and rolled down the stairs. Lulak already knew what to do in this sort of situation. Wouldn't he injure her as badly as last time if the same thing happened twice? Instinctively leaning to the opposite side of Tia, Lulak collapsed on the stairs. Grandfather, he heard Tia's shocked voice. He could feel his granddaughter clutching his shoulder as if she was still trying to protect Lulak somehow. In his gradually fading consciousness, Lulak patted the back of his granddaughter's, just like he did a while ago. Don't be too surprised, I'm fine. However, falling to say all that, Lulak eventually lost his consciousness on the steps in front of the entrance. Slush, slush, slush. Estira, what's going on? My voice was so cold that it was unfamiliar. As grandfather was safely taken to the bedroom, Estira immediately ran over right away. He'll regain consciousness in no time. He'll be all right. How bad is grandfather's condition? If you had told me earlier, I would have been more careful. I wouldn't have let you go all alone on such a long journey to the palace. Various thoughts were rushing through my mind. Don't scold Dr. Estira too much. I was the one who told her not to tell anyone. My grandfather was slowly lifting himself up. Grandfather. My grandfather smiled as I approached him. In the end, isn't this all because of my old age? No matter how effective the medicine is, it still can't full time. What grandfather said was correct. In my previous life, my grandfather was already gradually struggling to move and always needed someone's help to walk. Unlike right now, he wouldn't even have been able to imagine being able to get up from the bed himself or visiting the palace freely by himself. I apologized to Estira. I'm sorry, Estira. I spoke out of turn there. It's fine, Miss Florentia was also very shocked. Estira gave me a warm smile as she handed the medicine to my grandfather. I think it's because I was very fatigued today. Should I take my medicine more often? I'd advise you to rest properly for a few days and observe your progress, Patriarch. I see. Grandfather shook his head as if he knew it would be so. This has become extremely troubling. There's nothing to worry about. You have to rest completely, grandfather. My grandfather burst into laughter at my words. But shouldn't someone go to the noble meeting and preside over the Brown family's reinstatement? Don't worry about that. Perez already knows about that and will take care of it. All right, Tia. It will be fine if you go. It will be fine if you go. What? I doubted my ears for a moment. I tried to scratch my ear with my little finger since I thought I had heard wrong as my grandfather smiled and said to me, Tia, you go to the noble meeting instead of me. But, grandfather, that's right. It's something only an acting head can do. I nearly forgot to breathe as I looked at my grandfather. Grandfather smiled kindly and said again, as if to confirm with me, you'll attend the noble meeting as Lombardi's acting patriarch, Tia. End of chapter 206. Chapter 207. I'll have to stop him. Empress Rabini said to Luigi. Luigi Angenes was more frightened by Rabini's calm appearance. Ever since she was a child, Rabini was someone who had a fiery personality and smashed things when she was angry. However, now, she looked very calm. But Luigi thought he'd rather her be angry. It was because he felt as if a calm Rabini further proved that the situation was not good, perhaps even worse than Luigi could even imagine. Rabini, who had taken all the real power and left a puppet in the patriarch's seat, was resentful, but now was time to leave those sort of feelings behind. What should I do, sister? Luigi asked seriously. Didn't I tell you we have to stop him? A blue blood vessel throbbed on the back of Rabini's clenched fists. That lowly thing. Rabini gritted her teeth when she thought of Perez. She had thought that it was quiet for a time being, but couldn't believe that he had actually secretly planned this sort of scheme behind their backs during this time. It's clear that the second Prince, Brown, and Lombardi all had a part in this, Luigi. The one who had held a hunting competition and attracted them to Madman's Forest was none other than Florentia Lombardi. Although I'd very much like to cut off the head of that disgraceful thing. She was still the Patriarch Lombardi's granddaughter, and the daughter of Galliahan Lombardi. She didn't know how Lombardi would react if she touched her recklessly. Besides, the imperial army was not allowed to step foot into the Lombardi's mansion. Rabini, whose thoughts had spread to the imperial knights, asked Luigi, how is the issue with the knights coming along? There's a division of them within the imperial knights. Angenes occupied the west, expanding their influence, and the empress who was originally from Angenes would give birth to a legitimate heir. The 40 years that Angenes had spent building up their power were enough for them to spread their people throughout the empire, and the Imperial Knights was one of them. According to the report, they're saying it's split in half. Half? Rabini raised her eyebrows. We've put so much money into the Imperial Knights during this time, and you're telling me we only have half? Twak. Rabini punched the table. The thing is, it should be the current knight commander, Tolyan Bakton. It seems that the second prince and the Brown family are united around him. If we had a little more time, we could have replaced the knight commander's position with our own men. If only there was a little more time, Empress Rabini kept muttering these words. Something was strange. It was hard for words to describe it, but the things that were definitely going to go to plan were all being dislocated. It was a great sense of incongruity. She kept having a strange premonition that she might have been toying with one person for too long, which was ridiculous, but she couldn't ignore it. The one who had found the dying second prince and became his guardian, then the one who had sent him to the academy beyond the influence of the empress, the man who gave the returned second prince a chance to grab a position in politics under the pretext of the northern landslide, and even gave his granddaughter a boost, and finally, the one who had set up the spectacular stage for the Brown family to draw everyone's attention, Lombardi, that old man. In the meantime, if you looked at everything that had been, in a way, of Rabini and Dungeness, Lombardi was the one behind it every single time. Rabini tried to cool her head when she recalled dealing with Lulak. One had to keep their head above water in order to successfully deal with him. I'll leave the noble meeting up to you and Patriarch Soshu. Luigi, no matter what happens, the Browns must not be put back onto the aristocratic register. Of course, Luigi and Janice answered quickly. It would have been very difficult to deal with Lulak Lombardi alone, but the odds were stacked against the Lombardi if they were acting together with Soshu. In fact, the power of the Anjanas became stronger at noble meetings after it was revealed to the public that Shushu was standing on the same side of the first prince. But how do I explain what happened to the first prince? In the meantime, Luigi has been spreading rumors about how Astana didn't do it on his own. He was just high on drugs. Thanks to this, the ones who supported Anjanas and feared that the first prince would be dethroned and lead to something big happening had subsided, but further measures needed to be added. He's being falsely accused. Someone drugged Astana. Put it that way. If they asked me who drugged him, of course the correct answer was Chapter 208. A sharp silence that seemed as if it were about to explode pierced the room. Susu remained calm, even in front of Rabini's face that was gradually becoming colder. He lifted his teacup, which he had put down again, and even drank a few more sips of the tea. Although the body that filled the chair was large, the handling of the teacup was quite delicate. Just what are you saying? Rabina's voice trembled. She was furious. The face that was smiling beautifully, like a smooth porcelain mask, was gradually cracking due to her anger. It's exactly like I've said, the Susu patriarch answered while slowly lowering his hand down onto his bad knee. It was a hand that belonged to a knight who had many scars. The deadline for the funds lent out to the Anjanas by Susu had already passed. So, if you aren't able to return that money right away, we'll have to seize the collateral. Hey, Patriarch Susu! Eventually, a loud shout burst out from the Empress. The smile that tried hard to seem calm finally collapsed with a crash. You want me to return the money right now? Aren't you also aware of how impossible your condition is? Have I said anything that was incorrect, Your Majesty the Empress? Chanton Susu had an odd look on his face. His twisted mouth made it hard to determine whether he was angry or smiling. Seeing the face he had made, Rabina's anger within her exploded. Are you pretending to be me right now? Of course not. If not, then what? What are you trying to do, getting me to suddenly repay you such a large sum of money at a time like this? I know, borrowing such a large amount of money, yet feeling so at ease, how strange. Finally, the patriarch of Susu let out a dry laugh and smirked, but the gaze in his eyes was as thin as the surface of ice. Since you've borrowed the money, it's natural that you now have to pay it back. Empress Rabini glared at the Chanton in front of her. She was so angry that she had reached the point where her shoulders were shaking every time she took a breath. However, she couldn't even scream according to her personality, because it was true that the Anjanas had borrowed money from Susu, using their estates and land as the collateral. Subsequently, the hilt of the sword was rightfully held by Susu. The Empress, who had been glaring at Chanton Susu for a long time, finally opened her mouth. Is the South so insufficient for you to covet the West as well? Representing both regions isn't allowed, so the West will still be under the jurisdiction of Anjanas. I'm already aware of that. And yet you're still greedy for our land. Aren't you being overly ambitious right now? That could be possible, the Patriarch of Susu said languidly, as if he was stretching. But of course, I wouldn't be the only one who has a lot of greed. Wouldn't the Anjanas, the ones who seized someone else's property, who also have a lot of greed? Patriarch Susu. Her body trembled at the insults that were thrown directly in her face. Her nails dug painfully into her palm as she clenched her fists. However, thanks to the pain, Rabini regained her rationality. Then she took a deep breath, whilst calmly grasping the situation. Patriarch Susu, yes, please continue. If you're trying to pretend to be me, you'll regret it. I've already said it a while earlier. Your Majesty the Empress, Susu is not trying to replace Anjanas. I'm just claiming the accumulated debt. Then I'll arrange for the funds to be repaid within this month. If we're not able to by then, I'll hand over the deeds of the land. Empress Rabini put down all of her pride and suggested. However, Patriarch Susu shook his head. I'm sorry. Actually, the deadline stated in the contract is already 3 days overdue. I've already waited for the past 3 days, so I came here in order to get the deeds of the land today. There's no such law, or should we ask His Majesty the Emperor to mediate? Susu interrupted the Empress and asked. It was a method that was occasionally used when conflicts between nobles escalated, just like it did with Anjanus and Brown a long time ago. It was normally a suggestion that was welcomed with open arms, but Empress Rabini's complexion was still as dark as it was before, because it was the excessive fickle Emperor Jovanes. She did not know what kind of ruling he would make if he was asked to solve such a problem, especially in a situation where because of Astana he was in such a foul temper. Perhaps he might have asked Anjanus to spit out something else on top of their fief as collateral. Clenching her teeth together, Empress Rabini rose from her seat and opened the safe. It contained the deeds to the various areas under the jurisdiction of Anjanus. Rabini's fingertips trembled as she pulled out the deeds from among the pile to the places that were stated in the contract. However, when she returned to her seat with the deeds to the land, her expression had already returned to normal. Before she handed over the deeds, Empress Rabini spoke. You already said you wouldn't pretend to be me. That's right. Then please make sure you attend tomorrow's noble meeting. And what we've done today is not to leave your mouth. Don't tell anyone. Now it was more important than ever for Anjanus to show an unshakable and solid appearance. Patriarch Susu, who seemed to agonize over her request for a while, nodded shortly after. I'll do that then. Also, you'll return the deeds to our fief if we repay the amount of money we borrowed, right? That's quite difficult. We've already made plans for the estates in the West. You'd better put aside those plans, since we'll get that money as soon as possible. Empress Rabini's words and scornful laughter elicited a rare laugh from Patriarch Susu, who seldom did so. Then while accepting the bundle of documents that the Empress was offering to him, he told her, Then you'll have to hurry, your Majesty the Empress. And slash slash slash. The day of the aristocratic meeting dawned. In no time, my carriage was already approaching the venue where the noble meeting would take place. Of course, it was the carriage that my grandfather always used, the carriage for the head of the Lombardis. I swept my hand over the interior of the carriage, which was beautifully decorated in gold, like the black silk dress I was wearing. The feeling of riding on this carriage, I missed it. This unshakable sense of security that seems to be put into this moving carriage, the Patriarch of Lombardy's carriage. Of course, I had also ridden in this carriage in my previous life. However, I was only accompanying my grandfather everywhere as a secretary to assist him. Now it's mine. Now it's for me, Florentia Lombardi, the acting Patriarch Lombardi, and no one else. And just like that, I felt as if I had an unspoken connection with the carriage, and soon arrived in front of the place that the aristocratic council was to be held. I patted the ornament of the world tree and whispered, "Just wait here for a while, all right? I'll be back. I'll be right back after finishing this task." Those words weren't just said for no reason. The aristocratic meeting this time wouldn't be too long. I walked softly, taking leisurely steps. As soon as I entered the conference room, countless pairs of eyes focused on me. "Oh, it's young miss?" An old nobleman who was talking to another nobleman by the door asked me. It was a man who belonged to the faction that sided with Angenes. "Are you sure you haven't come to the wrong place, young miss? Is there perhaps a book club taking place near here?" The sound of several people talking in whispers could be heard. As I slowly glanced at their faces one by one, the information regarding them floated in front of them. That fat man who offered a bribe to his father and was turned down. That grumpy-looking man who was competing with Shananet in the mining industry, and the person who sent me a teddy bear for my 8th birthday. There were very few people who were completely new to me in here. Then someone approached me. "Oh, isn't this Lombardi's young miss?" He was a nobleman I had seen several times before at a banquet. He was a member of a household who was quite close to Lombardi, and was always stuck right next to either my grandfather or Vij. "Hello." Since I don't remember his name, let's just omit it completely. Instead, I gave him a bright smile and asked, "This is the conference room that will be used for the upcoming noble meeting, right?" "That's right, but could you please let me know which seat my grandfather sits in when he normally attends the meeting?" "Where the Patriarch Lombardi sits?" The nobleman tilted his head for a while before telling me to follow him for now. As I started to walk, numerous pairs of eyes also moved with me. Curiosity, disapproval, vigilance, all sorts of things stung the back of my head. I gradually became more and more convinced by the fact that if I were not a Lombardi, I would not have been allowed into the conference room. Patriarch Lombardi hasn't arrived yet. Yes, I know. Right now, grandfather is recuperating in bed. Aha, then did you perhaps come here to see Patriarch Lombardi? No, nothing like that. The nobleman who guided me to my seat constantly chattered on without stopping. Fortunately, my grandfather's seat was not too far from the entrance, exactly to the right of the chairman's chair. The seat that was in the row furthest to the front and right in the center. It was a chair that didn't look particularly stable or firm. However, I was well aware of what such a position meant in this place. "It's here. However, as you can see, Patriarch Lombardi hasn't arrived yet." Flop. I ignored the nobleman who was talking about some other nonsense again and sat my butt down onto the empty chair. I saw the Angenes faction on the other side glance over. What an ideal spot. I laughed when I thought of my grandfather sitting in this chair and glaring at the nobles on the other side. "What exactly are you doing right now?" The eyes of the nobleman who guided me to my seat were wide open with astonishment. The responses of the others in the conference room were no different. "Ahem, Lady Lombardi." Then I heard a courteous voice calling me. It was the chairman. "Yes, Chairman Killian. It's been a while since I saw you. You came to my coming of age ceremony, didn't you?" "Yes, I did do that." I could see the complex emotions flit past the chairman's face. He probably won't be able to understand the situation any further since the appearance of me sitting in the conference room probably overlaps with the one of me having my coming of age ceremony only a few years ago. Ahem, Lady Lombardi. That seat is the seat of your grandfather, Patriarch Lombardi. The seat of my grandfather, the Lord Lombardi. If you'd like to watch the noble meeting, there's a spot at the back over there. I've come here to attend the meeting, not spectate it. Attend? Yes, Sir Speaker. The chairman looked at me, dumbfounded. The nobles who were waiting to attend the meeting started to talk as a crowd. However, it was all like joyous music to my ears. "If you're attending, I'm sure you understand what I'm saying by now." I repeated it once again, one word at a time in a clear and articulate voice to the chairman in order to confirm it with him again. "Florentia Lombardi, the acting Patriarch of Lombardi." End of chapter 208. Chapter 209. What do you mean by deputy head? Chairman Killian said in bewilderment. Did something happen to the head of Lombardi? I could feel a lot of people listening to the chairman's question. I knew this question would come up. It's not good for them to know that Grandpa is sick in this situation, as it looks like a confrontation between Lombardi and Angenas. I should avoid demoralizing our side before the chaotic aristocrats meeting starts. I spoke coldly with a smile on purpose. It seems you have a lot of questions for me, Chairman Killian. I took a glance at the chairman's hardening expression and watched his face as I added a question. Will you ask my grandfather so many questions as well? No, I just didn't get informed in advance. Ah, really? Does everyone really have to know this beforehand? No matter how much I enjoyed this thrilling moment, I was increasingly annoyed by the unnecessary procedures and bureaucratic attitudes of the aristocrats. I looked straight at Chairman Killian and asked, what do you mean by that, Chairman? Does my grandfather need your permission first to send in a deputy head? Well, surely not, but then there's no problem at all, is there? Ah, yes. Chairman Killian, who hesitated for a moment, changed his tone. I attended as a deputy head, so he needs to treat me the same way as the head of Lombardy. That's great then. I smiled at Chairman Killian once and then turned away. It meant that I would no longer want to talk to him about this issue anymore. Then a person came through the door of the conference hall, the Empress. The old nobleman, who had just stepped into the conference hall and was muttering to himself about me, saw Empress Rubini and quickly took a step back and bowed his head. That man was always loyal to the Angenas, even in his previous life without receiving anything in return, and it seems the same this time. I shook my head and looked at Empress Rubini. She looked so confident that no one would think that her son was detained for the attempted murder of the emperor. The empress, who stood upright and looked relaxed inside the conference hall, found me sitting in the designated head seat. She seemed a little surprised at first, then she soon began to glare at me. Even though it was quite far away, I could feel her death glare. Unlike other nobles, I didn't stand up and greet her, but the empress can't do anything about it. I'm the deputy head of Lombardy now. Lombardy does not bow to anyone but the emperor. Instead, I smiled with one of the corners of my mouth raised as I looked at the Empress, really looked straight at me. Then I saw the Empress staring back at me with eyes 10 times colder before turning her head away and taking a seat in the audience. Today, we are having the council meeting of the aristocrats. Empress Rabini, who has already abandoned her status as a noblewoman and became one of the imperial family members, has no say in it. She has no choice but to sit in the audience and watch the meeting. Nevertheless, for her to come all the way here was proof that today's meeting is so important to the Empress and Angenas. There are a lot of spectators from the imperial palace today, aren't there? I said to the person sitting next to me, deliberately assuming a smug face. Oh, that's right. As one of Lombardy's closest vassals, head Bernice, who always sat next to my grandfather, nodded and responded instinctively to my sudden question. Ah, His Highness the Second Prince is here now. This time it was Perez who just arrived. Not long before, Perez found me in the head seat, and when he did, he paused just as the Empress did a while ago. I did not deliberately tell Perez anything. I wanted to surprise him. Perez looked at me for a brief moment before nodding his head towards me, as if paying respects to my grandfather. In an instant, the attention of the whole conference hall was focused on us. Although we were publicly engaged, we are now meeting as the Crown Prince and the Deputy Head of Lombardy. It's the kind of situation where you couldn't help but be curious. I likewise greeted Perez casually and started a conversation with the person next to me like it's no big deal. It's just me, or is Head and Janus not here today? That person is always late. Glancing sideways, Perez was greeted by several nobles and took a seat in the conference hall opposite the Emperor's seat. And there was a man who came in after Perez. The head of Brown family is here. At my words, the nobles sitting around leisurely quickly turned their heads in the same direction as mine. Head Brown, who entered the conference room with a complex expression, thought for a moment before sitting next to Perez. That person is the rumored. He looks just like the former Head Brown that I met when I was young. Head Brown, who quietly seated at his chosen seat in the conference hall, looked excellent. The reactions of the nobles who did not come to the hunting competition were not so bad. Had Head Brown tried to settle in a seat where only nobles are seated, he would have greatly offended them. It was important not to catch their attention and offended those who attended the conference as much as possible, as Brown was trying to reclaim their rights as a noble through this meeting. The faces of those Andrenas and of people sticking to them don't look so good. Maybe because he's not sober right now. This time, the young nobleman sitting behind me asked, what about him not being sober? Luigi, the head of Anjana's family, is weak. He can't stay bare before this important meeting. I heard he was drinking strong alcohol before the meeting. There were quite a few people around me coughing a little. This meant that the existence of the head of Susu family was uncomfortable for the people of the pro-Lombardy camp. And at that moment I saw the silent encounter between the eyes of head Susu and Perez. It was just a brief second when our eyes met while they were turning their heads to look away. I felt like I was going to laugh. If it wasn't for Chant and Susu, Bernice muttered, half the power of the Anjanas family comes from the Chanton Susu, right? As I said, Bernice and the people surrounding us opened their eyes wide. Lady Lombardi, rather, I would like to know why you've come to be the deputy head. This old man is so You're judging people quite openly. However, the prejudice towards me being just a young miss is only the beginning. In the future, I will face these curious gazes and prejudices countless times. I can't let myself get tired already, I replied with a shrug. Should there be any reason for why my grandfather made me the deputy head, Lord Bernice? Ah, no, there isn't. It was careless of me to ask. Fortunately, Bernice shook his head quickly and admitted, and I was thinking of saying, don't worry too much. If it wasn't for the stare that's piercing my side. I turned my head and looked at the person staring at me. Lord Bernice, yes, Lady Lombardi, why is the head of Susu looking at me like that? The people around me looked at Chanton Susu at my words. However, head Susu even drew a persistent gaze towards me. Shall I yell and tell him off so he'll look away? Head Bernice leaned closer and asked quietly, what yell? The meeting hasn't even started yet. It's still early, but the atmosphere was already not good. The people around me answered my question. No, well, what else can we do? In the past, even before starting such important meetings, we were sometimes yelling at each other, and we were always cheering for the ones on our side. That's right, that's how the atmosphere gets better. Is this a cheerleading event? No, it's okay. I refused, waving one hand, not wanting to see the old people screaming loudly with veins visible on their necks in front of my eyes. But why does everyone looks disappointed? It's past the start of the meeting, and everyone seems to be present, so I will now close the door to the conference hall. Chairman Killian stood up and coughed several times before declaring in a solemn voice, now then, let's start the council meeting. Bam, bam, bam. The gavel slammed 3 times. End of chapter 209. Chapter 210. At Lombardi's mansion, Lula quickly put candy into his mouth after taking the medicine Estira handed him. It's very sweet, very sweet. Lula would have been fed up with the bitter medicine by now and should be frowning, but it's quite the opposite. You're in a good mood today, my lord, Estira asked, tilting her head. Are you feeling much better? Yes, that's right. Lulak smiled dryly. Then he said, checking the time, maybe the meeting has begun by now. Then he rolled the candy in his mouth once. Eventually, a burst of laughter flowed from Lulak's mouth. My lord, ha 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 ha. How embarrassed they must have been since Tia suddenly showed up instead of me. Lulak grabbed his stomach and laughed hard. It's too bad that I can't see those faces. It's regretful. Ha 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 ha. The loud laughter of Lulak went on for quite a long time. Istira, who was shaking her head while watching him from the side, said quietly, Will Miss Florentia be all right? Yes. Lulak stopped his laughter and looked at Istira. Why do you think she won't be okay, Dr. Istira? Because she's still young, and the fact that a woman is attending a nobles meeting as a deputy head. She's not just any other kid. It's Tia who we've seen doing all sorts of things. That is so. Of course, I had tried to discourage Tia at first. However, Lulak's laughter, which had stopped, began again. Ha! They will definitely die in envy. Envy? How many of those families do you think have a proper successor? They are all at their wits' end because of their stupid children. Seeing our Tia, how envious they must be, wouldn't they? Lulak stretched out on the bed and threw another candy into his mouth. Yes, they must be envious, envious. Ho ho, Lulak hummed, imagining the faces of the nobles filling the conference hall as Tia walked in and showed how smart and stubborn she is. Leaning against the bed, the tips of each foot bobbed to the cheerful hum. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The first and only issue of today's meeting is the restoration of the Brown family's name in the Registry of Nobility. Chairman Killian said, looking left and right at the audience. His Majesty personally referred to the Nobles' Council meeting, and he said, I will leave the judgment entirely to the result of the meeting. Javanes, that punk. I can't believe he's passing all this important decision on to someone else. The only thing he does to say that he is the emperor is to open his reserves which are not open to the aristocracy. Gilliard Brown, come forward, Chairman Killian said, pointing to the low podium prepared in the middle of the seats spread out on both sides. Soon, Head Brown, who was sitting in the conference room, slowly approached the center. He didn't look as intimidating as he did when I first saw him, and he looked nervous. Although he might be nervous, Head Brown seemed confident, especially throughout his walk. He looked straight at the Angenes. Standing on the podium, he showed courage for everyone to see, even for the side where the Empress was sitting. He didn't even try to hide his right sleeve, which was empty of limb and swayed along with his steps. This is what your family did to us. It was as if he was saying so. I'm Gilliard Brown, head of the Brown family. First of all, I would like to thank Chairman Killian for giving me the opportunity to speak. I thought a messy trembling voice would come out. Unexpectedly, Brown's voice was calm. It was as if he had dreamed dozens or even hundreds of times that this day would come. Our Brown family had lived for decades as a sword to protect the imperial family until it was trampled by bandits 40 years ago. It was referring to Angenes, the bandits. Although for a while our rights as an aristocrat have been forfeited, the Browns have lived up to their pride as one of the oldest and most prestigious families in the empire. The head of Brown's firm eyes met mine. Gilliard Brown is here to beg his fellow nobles to please help the Brown family once again serve the great Lumbru Empire as an imperial noble and imperial sword. It was a good speech. It was neither overly low-key nor arrogant. The Brown family once the main pillar of the empire, was dignified but modest in asking for help. As the aristocrats in the conference hall thought so, the atmosphere that had been hardened was softened a lot. Now, are there any families reapproving on this agenda? Chairman Killian asked the nobles. Anyone can freely present an agenda, but whether or not it is properly discussed at a nobles meeting must be approved by at least five noble families. There was a low silence in the conference hall, and most people were looking at each other. Sitting in the audience, Paris and Empress Ravini read each other's minds. Requesting the Browns to be reinstated was a direct contradiction to the interest of the Empress and her forces, so no one easily wanted to reapprove the agenda. It was obvious in their heads that they were busy weighing the pros and cons. Is this really the end of the first prince? If so, will we no longer need to see Anjanus and catch the Empress' attention? Someone said that the first prince was drugged. Wouldn't there be room for consideration as per usual? And most crucially, which side should we follow, the first prince or the second prince? Just by looking at the people's concerned faces, you can see that the power of Anjanus is still alive. Becoming the great lord of the West must just by having blood ties with the Empress and kicking out the Brown family. It's a great deal of power, but that too ends today. The Lombardi family makes a secondary approval. In an instant, all eyes were on me, and a few seconds later, I will reapprove. My family would also like to reappoint them too, so I reapprove. I will also reapprove. From the side where I was sitting, there was a line of declarations of reapprovals. Well, since there are far more than five families calling for the reappointment of the Brown family, I will approve the Brown family reinstatement as an official agenda. From now on, you may feel free to express your opinion on this agenda. As soon as Chairman Killian reached the end of his words, Luigi Anjanus rose from his feet. The Anjanus family thinks this issue doesn't make sense at all. The head of Anjanus looked at the head of Brown with blue eyes resembling Empress Ravini. According to the Imperial Nobility Act, in order to maintain the rights of aristocrats, there must be a territory, even if it is a palm-sized territory. I knew it would come out like this. There wasn't much that Anjanus could claim to prevent the Browns from being reinstated. Luigi Anjanus continued his words, because it is the duty of the nobles to pay taxes and protect the other noble families living in the lands given by His Majesty the Emperor. People around Anjanus nodded in unison. In addition, the family law states if more than 20 years have passed since the estate was lost, the family would be relegated to a fallen nobility. It is precisely stated that after 10 years of not owning a territory after becoming a fallen noble, they shall be removed from the registry of nobility through the due process at the nobles' meeting. So just a few years ago, by the instigation of the Anjanus, the Brown family disappeared completely from registry of nobility. It was for 40 years. No one in this position will be able to deny that this is the strict criteria that separate the nobility, the fallen nobility, and the commoners. Oh, you're good at talking. He comes in like this with the help of alcohol. Luigi, the head of Anjanus, spoke in a loud voice without signs of great nervousness. For a second, I almost felt like saying, is that so? The atmosphere inside the conference hall has changed subtly. I turned my head slightly and checked the audience. The expression of the head of Braun has hardened, and the Empress, no need to say it, albeit beautiful, a smug smile slowly spread across her lips. But what's with the situation of the Browns now? Eventually, Luigi Anjanus said aloud, pointing his finger at the head of Brown. No, maybe he wants to point at Perez behind Gilliard Brown. There has been no territory for the past 40 years, and its name has long since disappeared from the registry of nobility. How can such a family come out now and demands the rights of nobility again? And as if showing everyone he was drunk, whilst being such an enthusiast, bang! He even hits the armrest of the seat. True, that's right. The nobles of the Anjanus camp raised their voices together as if they had waited for this very moment. It was in an instant that the quiet conference hall became a street market. In addition, what do you think of nobles who have not paid a penny in the last 40 years? Every family here pays huge taxes to the imperial family every year. If you calculate it, it will be around 4,000 gold. Hey, Gilliard Brown, you have a mouth, so why don't you speak up and tell us yourself? Taking the opportunity, Anjanus pushed hard, trying to root him out. Well, you're right. There are laws like that. Chairman Killian muted and sneaked a glance at me. Although the Killian family was close to Lombardy in nature, he must remain neutral as the chairman. But as I sat still, the chairman's face showed disappointment. It was clear that he thought that I am not doing my part as a deputy head of Lombardy. Ha! Luigi Anjanus was laughing, while looking at me, whispering about something with the nobles sitting around him. I turned my head and looked at the Empress. The Empress was no different. She was smiling lightly, just to maintain her dignity, but I clearly knew how she felt inside. I slowly opened my mouth while looking at her face. The Brown family's backlog in taxes is exactly 4,320 gold. The conference hall slowly became quiet. I will give 5,000 gold, courtesy of Lombardy. Long ago, the Lyra coal mine I bought was 2,050 gold. 5,000 gold was a huge sum of money for any noble family, but not for Lombardy. 5,000 gold, even if tenfold of that is withdrawn, the bottom of Lombardy's finances won't show. I smiled slowly and asked Luigi and Genes, then only the territory is left, right? Head and Genes. Well, yes, then the Brown family's reinstatement shouldn't be a big problem. What nonsense, Luigi and Genes huffed loudly. Mister, you're going to have a runny nose if you keep it up. Why? Do you intend to take one of the Lombardy's estates for yourself? How crude. I am sitting here as a deputy head of Lombardy, but that's how you talk to me. So rude. Not surprisingly, people from Lombardy's side started to point fingers and yell, Hey you, what in the hell are you saying? Did you sell the Brown family off along with your conscience? I smiled at the nobles who were angry in my stead, but soon gestured that it was fine before speaking to Luigi again. That's a great idea. While that, Luigi Angenes was greatly flustered. He looked surprised that I would even given away one of Lombardy's estates right now, but it won't be necessary, Head and Janus. A territory would not drop from the sky, no matter what else Luigi and Janus yells. I completely ignored it. Then I looked at Chanton Susu, who was sitting silently in his seat. Isn't that right, Head Susu? End of chapter 210.